Good morning. I thought this morning I would visit with you about student loans because I know that many of you went to college thinking that was the best way to prepare yourselves for life as an adult. And when you got out of school, you realized that you had a large liability that's quite difficult to deal with. And I think it's an unfair situation for sure because I think when you're 18 years old, you're not really prepared to make decisions about taking on debt that can be the equivalent of a home mortgage. And student debt is very different from other debt because you can't even unburden yourself through the normal process of bankruptcy, which people can do if they find that they've taken on too much debt and they cannot manage that debt. And frankly, I think a big solution would be just to allow students to deal with that debt through bankruptcy and start their life again, which many people are able to do. But basically, that's not where we're at right now. So I want to just give you some advice about how to deal with your student loans. The most important thing is you do need to deal with them. You can't just pretend that they don't exist. So what you want to do is start by determining that you're going to at least make minimum payments on those student loans. Now, I'm going to back up for a minute and say you can't make payments on student loans if you don't have a job. So you need to get a job. And your job, when you're a young person, is the most valuable asset that you have. You have nothing. We all come into the world basically with nothing. We may gain some assets from our parents over time, but basically we start at zero. And so your goal in life with regard to material things is to accumulate enough assets that at some point in your life when you're no longer able to work, those assets that you've accumulated can work for you. But my point is that when you have a job that pays some amount of money, let's say $50,000 a year, a job that pays $50,000 a year is about as valuable as a portfolio with $1 million in it. So you don't want to quit your job. You don't want to miss work and do things that make you less valuable in the eyes of the people you're working for, because again, if they give you a raise from 50,000 to 60,000, now all of a sudden that asset, your job, is worth $1,250,000 in assets. And what I mean by that is to draw that equivalent amount of income off of assets and not be working. That's about how much it would take. So when we get ready to deal with our student debt, the first thing we have to do is look at our job prospects. And we need a job that pays a good wage. And sometimes that means you take a job that doesn't actually suit you or that you're not particularly happy with. A lot of people, in fact, the majority of people are not happy with their work, but they work out of necessity. The work that we do today is much more pleasant than the work that had to be done 50, 75, and 100 years ago. And we're able to do it in less hours. So that brings us to another point. If a job is your asset and you can work two jobs, now you have two assets. So, and there's another benefit to working two jobs when you're struggling under a massive load of debt and you're trying to accumulate assets. The benefit is that when you spend time working, that's time that you don't have to pay money to fill with some form of entertainment. And so in a way, the more time that you can spend working, the less time that you have to be going to movies and bowling and buying video games or whatever you do for entertainment. So when you're young and healthy and excited about your life ahead, and that's what we're trying to do, is get you excited about life ahead, even with this big burden of student debt on your back. You take that bull by the horns and work two jobs. Now you have two incomes. Maybe you could take one of those incomes, the whole income from your second job, and pop it onto that student loan to deal with that in a quick way. I'm not going to necessarily recommend that right out of the chute, because I think in time our nation is going to have to deal with the student loan crisis. And if you pay your loan off ahead of time, and then the government comes in and says, we are going to forgive student loans, or we're going to at least give them some sort of a reprieve, maybe through bankruptcy, or maybe they just say, we're going to reduce the interest rate by a whole bunch. You're not going to get the benefit of that if you've already responsibly paid off your loan. So right now, while we're in this time of flux and trying to figure out what to do about this as a nation, because we've saddled our young kids with this big problem, I would just suggest that you make minimum payments on your student loan, but you have to be disciplined enough to take the other money and invest it in something that's going to grow. And generally what I recommend is a Roth IRA, which you can put, I believe, $7,000 a year into and invest it in some form of equities. That means stocks. And the best way to do that is through mutual funds or index funds. That way you will have the best opportunity to make 8 to 10% a year without taking on an inordinate amount of risk. I would also suggest, when you're trying to get ahead early in life, that you might have a budget. If that budget will help you to control your spending, eating out, entertainment, these are big items in our society today, especially for young folks. And you've just got to be creative and find ways to eat at home. It's about probably 1/3 to 1/4 as expensive to eat at home as it is to eat out. And maybe even entertain people at home, where you cook for friends or something of that nature. Now, things get complicated if you're married and you have kids. Then, of course, the budget is going to have a lot more expenses and so on in it. But the budget kind of gives you an idea of what the future can look like with the amount of income that you have. And let's see if there's another couple of things that might be useful here. I would just say, look, the bottom line is, don't ignore your student debt. Income is key. It's really the only asset you have as a young person. And expenses are the opposite of income. So you want to keep your expenses low. And your biggest expense, by the way, is going to be your living quarters, whether it's an apartment or a house. The less you can spend there initially, the more you're going to have for other things. And so I would just try to find a way to minimize your occupancy cost. And that may mean a very small apartment. Maybe it's an efficiency apartment. Perhaps it's to take on a roommate, or even to rent a house with 3 other roommates if the house is big enough for something like that. That could make your housing expense affordable for all of those folks. And that would work much better if the 4 of you are more or less in the same boat and you're determined to get some assets built up and your student loans under control. If you put that money into that Roth IRA, as I was recommending, and 4 or 5 years down the road, nothing's been done about student loans and you've got to pay that loan off, you could take that money out of the Roth IRA and the amount you put in could come out tax-free. You could leave the earnings in there, take it out tax-free, apply it to the student loan, and you're right where you would have been if you'd have made bigger payments to start with. So what I want you to do is acknowledge the fact that you got the student loan, step up to it. It's your responsibility. You did agree to take the loan out. You have your education. Hopefully it's going to help you to get a better job, get the best job that you can, 2 jobs if you have the time, and minimize your expenses to deal with that student loan. And in the same process, you're trying to accumulate assets. And I would say, by the way, you definitely want to save something. Even if you have big student loans, you can apply a lot of money to the student loans and a little money to savings, or minimize the payment on the student loan, but make the minimum payment and put all the money into savings. And I also want to mention, you don't want to neglect your gifting to the Lord. If you're a Christian, we talk about tithing, but tithing is not necessarily what you got to do, but you do want to give something. You keep it all in balance. And at the same time, I've made a video on moderation. I'm not saying that you're not going to have any entertainment or you're not going to have any vacation time or anything like that. I'm just saying with a budget, where you budget for those things, you can do all those things in moderation and still deal with your student loans. I hope this will help some of you young folks trying to get started in life. It's never been easy, not for your parents and not for their parents. This is the challenge of your day, and I think you can face up to it and deal with it, and that's what I think you ought to do. So thanks for taking a little time to listen to me today. I appreciate you listening to the video, and I enjoy making the videos, and I just hope that they will be helpful to somebody out there that just happens on them. Thank you very much.